I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you here for our webinar, Brexit, the Aftermath. My name is Crona Clohessy. I'm Public Policy Lead with the Institute, and I'm delighted to see so many of you here today. I suppose it's fair to say that 25 days into the new trading environment, the agreement reached between the EU and UK has thrown up a number of surprises and leaves a lot to be discussed in the weeks and months ahead. And I'm absolutely delighted to welcome two highly expert speakers here today on the subject matter of Brexit, and they're going to give us their unique insights into how, I suppose, businesses and other stakeholders are coping with the changes that Brexit has brought. So firstly, I'd love to introduce Tony Connolly. He's RTE's Europe editor and author, and I know he's been the voice in many's a house and kitchen across the island on all types of Brexit matters for the last 4 or 5 years. I'd also like to welcome Carl Lynch. He's a partner and customs and trade expert in BDO and has been helping numerous businesses across the island deal with the changes that Brexit has brought. So before I open the discussion, just to get some housekeeping out of the way, the webinar will finish just a few minutes before 1. I do promise to get everybody out on time. There's also going to be time for a Q&A at the end. So if you do have any questions for any of our speakers, please feel free to populate the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen anytime during the webinar, and we'll try to get to as many questions as we can. So I suppose without further ado, I'd love to get the conversation started. So Tony, I suppose turning to you really, firstly, I guess over the last number of weeks, we've really come to see that a free trade agreement doesn't always mean free trade, and Brexit really does mean Brexit. So in your expert opinion, how has the agreement, I suppose, been received in Europe, and what's your sense, I suppose, 25 days in?
Thanks very much, Crona, and good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. So I think the first thing we can say is that thank God it wasn't a no deal, because that would have, the problems we're seeing at the moment would have been 10 times worse, because you would have had tariffs and other barriers on top of that. I mean, I think in general, the view from Europe is that most of the problems are being felt by the UK, yes, by Ireland as well, and by some countries along the western seaboard of the EU. Other countries are not perhaps quite acutely as affected. And at a political level, there is a view that Brexit means Brexit, and there's a wholesale paradigm shift here that people simply have to get used to, that's the way it's going to be. I mean, these are inevitable changes from the status quo ante, which was Britain's membership of the EU, and people shouldn't be surprised at the material effects of Britain leaving the single market and the customs union. I mean, the EU as institutionally is, as we know, consumed by COVID-19 at the moment. They are generally relieved to get this deal over the line at the end of December, just before Christmas. And there is now a whole swathe of what they call internal cuisine to happen within the institutions. In other words, the treaty is being applied provisionally. The European Parliament has to ratify it. There's a whole sequence of events that have to happen. The treaty has to be translated into all the official languages. All of those translations have to be legally scrubbed to make sure that they are coherent and make sense. And the EU is also now looking at how it manages the relationship going forward as a body, but also there's a bit of tension between member states and the Commission about how the governance is going to work. So, for example, if there's a problem with the level playing field and, say, France feels that it's being undercut in a particular area, does the Commission just decide that that's the case or not? Or does France have a more assertive role to play in complaining about any undercutting or any disruption to the level playing field. So all of that stuff is being kind of managed at EU level at the moment. Also, the apparatus around the relationship has to be set up. There's the Joint Partnership Council, which is the body that will bring the EU and UK together to manage the implementation of the Trade and Cooperation Agreement. It'll be something a bit like the Joint Committee, which we have for the Northern Ireland Protocol and the Withdrawal Agreement. But again, that is not up and running yet. And the first thing it will have to do is to try and extend the provisional application until April to get all these things that I've talked about done on time. The translations, the legal scrubbing, the ratification by the European Parliament. So I suppose the mood in Europe is we now need to get on with it. This is now a reality. Yes, there may be things that the Commission can look at to make some life a bit easier, certainly around the protocol. I mean, that work is ongoing. I think there's definitely a sense of, we have to let this new reality kind of sink in. And, we've had a clamour and a hue and cry from business organisations in the UK saying this is awful, people are going to the wall, we need easements, we need facilitations. The view in Brussels is, well, this is what people voted for, this is what the British government negotiated, and that has to be, that reality has to sink in. Having said that, there is an ongoing relationship, and I think in due course, if there are mitigations or facilitations that can be made here and there, they'll probably look at them, but there's not going to be any wholesale waiving of the rules. And I would direct everyone to that very striking video of Dutch customs officials confiscating sandwiches at the Hook of Holland. I mean, that was definitely there as a signal that life has changed and is going to change, and people have to get used to it. So that's a kind of a quick, a sort of a snapshot of how people feel here at the moment.
Yeah, and I think Michel Barnier said on a number of occasions that this is the reality, that Brexit means Brexit and they're going to fully implement the rules. And I suppose, Carol, just on that point, I think at Irish ports, at British ports, that's really been felt over the last number of weeks. And I know the free trade agreement goes way beyond customs, but a free trade agreement is predominantly about trade. And I think what has been seen in the last number of weeks is that traders and goods have really suffered. So what are you hearing? Like, what's your sense of what's happened in the last 3 or 4 weeks?
Yeah, it's been very difficult out there in terms of movement of goods and just people being prepared and being able to comply with the rules that are in place. Certainly, I think there was a feeling last year. Well, first of all, everybody had to focus on COVID and as I was saying before, get through the COVID issues and deal with the problems they were facing on a day-to-day basis rather than looking at next year's problems. And then there was also a feeling that the trade agreement, that if there was a trade agreement, that it would be concluded at the last minute and that it would resolve all the problems. So there was a bit of a lack of understanding, I think, generally on the marketplace, that a trade agreement that would be concluded, or any trade agreement that would be concluded, would deal with tariffs, which are obviously a huge, massive issue, particularly for the agri-food industry, and require origin implementation, but that it wouldn't avoid the need for customs declarations and customs compliance. So there's a lot that has to be done in preparing for the movement of goods when you're working or when you're moving goods on an international basis. And now moving them from the UK or to the UK is no different than moving to any other kind of country outside of the EU. So we're seeing a lot of delays at the ports in relation to, particularly I think coming into Ireland, in relation to the preparation of the import declarations. I don't want to go into too much specifics, but entry summary declarations, pre-boarding notifications, and trying to get all those to match up. And it was a little bit more paperwork to be done on this side because the UK have facilitation for the next 6 months, where if you're established in the UK, you can defer making your customs declarations for 6 months, which is not something that the EU would have in place. So it really did come into effect immediately, with effect from 11 p.m. I think on 31st December. There was no kind of general implementation or half implementation for the EU. It came in straight away. So what we're seeing is difficulty in understanding the operational requirements. Certainly also problems in trying, where you would have been able to ship your goods, and if you're 45 minutes from the port, you just kept going and got on the boat. Now you have to have those declarations in, minimum of 2 hours in advance. And then if those declarations aren't right and there's, questions coming back from revenue, you can't move until you get those resolved. You've got all the issues surrounding the food and agri producers, who now have to also provide health certs and phyto certs and get those agreed with the Department of Agriculture in advance. So huge bureaucracy of paperwork that now needs to be completed, regardless of, you're not paying tariffs, and that's massive, and it's a massive benefit. But there's now compliance paperwork that really isn't adding any value. It's costing money. But you can't move your goods into or out of the country or into or out of the EU without this. And so we're now, companies are really having to learn those very quickly. And we can see, freight is substantially down. The number of trailers moving is way, way down. January is always quiet, but obviously it's a lot quieter this year. People would have stockpiled to the extent that they could, and we're working from that and trying not to move goods until they had a bit more clarity or they are a bit more prepared. But week on week, that freight is going to increase because stock moves, or stock runs out. So you're seeing, like, as one set of traders kind of gets used to the new rules, another set of traders is coming in having to learn again. So we're seeing, like, it is very, very slow at the ports. Once I found that once you've kind of got into a process and got into a procedure, and kind of know what you have to do, then it's fine. It's, putting those procedures in place is the critical thing. And like, we trade with the States, we trade with, Canada every day. So, these are things that every kind of international company does. But the thing now is just to kind of almost accept it and not to fight against it, and just to put the process in place.
Absolutely. And I suppose, it's the rules of origin that you just briefly touched on there that are causing an awful lot of surprises. I think, we're all familiar with the Percy Pig example of goods being exported or shipped to the UK and then re-exported into the EU. And it's causing huge problems. Could you just, maybe for our participants, could you just maybe explain in, I suppose, as simple language as possible, what the rules of origin, why are they causing so many problems in this particular free trade agreement?
Well, from a customs perspective, again, operationally, when you're moving goods under a free trade agreement, you have to be able to prove that those goods qualify as originating, and there is a process to that. So it's not simply that you move goods from the UK and that's it, they qualify for the trade agreement. You have to check your tariff code, check the rule of origin for that heading, and also ensure that you have substantial processing done. And the issue that's really come out over the last 2 weeks is in relation to goods moving from Europe into the UK, where the UK acts as a distribution centre. And probably this disproportionately affects Ireland. And Tony, you probably know more about this than me, but because Ireland is, part of the UK kind of Ireland sales network in a way, a lot of Irish companies wouldn't have the capacity to be able to purchase container loads of goods from Europe. So they'll go to the UK. 90% might be sold in the UK market, with 10% being shipped over to Ireland for sale. So it's all been very integrated. But the problem that we're facing is that if you continue that model and the UK goods are coming from Europe and then being distributed to Ireland, they lose their status as originating. And because there's not sufficient processing being done in the UK, they don't qualify for UK origin thereafter. So that's the Percy Pig issue essentially, but it's affecting food, it's affecting retail, and it doesn't exist in the Canadian Free Trade Agreement, probably because Canada is so far away that you're not going to have Canada as a distribution hub for Europe, but it's very specifically in the trade agreement in relation to where you import goods but don't do sufficient processing on them to enable those goods qualify as originating. Then duty becomes due. So now you've got companies having that duty hit where they didn't expect it.
Yeah, I mean, I can probably just pick up on that, Carol and Crona. I think this is an issue that did take everybody by surprise, this whole distribution hub question. And I think it first surfaced when there was a conference call between the Food and Drink Federation in the UK with DEFRA, and they were told that food or goods coming in from mainland Europe being reboxed or consolidated in the UK and then spun out again, either back to mainland Europe or over to Ireland, would lose their EU origin status, once they're taken out of a box. And it was described to me like the goods then become a stateless person, so they then acquire a tariff when they land back in Ireland. Politically, this is a delicate one for the Irish government. How much political capital should they spend on this? Because it does put Irish retailers at a disadvantage if they're being hit by tariffs. Yes, everyone is now talking about re-engineering supply chains, re-engineering the distribution question, and certainly the view in the Commission is that if you're operating within the single market, why would you have a distribution hub in a third country? That's got to change. The problem for Ireland is that we can't get away from our geography. The UK is a big wedge between Ireland and the EU. Yes, you can move these goods by transit, but again, that's not suitable for everybody. Transit is expensive. You need, as far as I know, Carol could probably correct me if I'm wrong, but you need to be an approved economic operator. You need a financial guarantee that the goods won't go missing in transit. And then in the meantime, what do you build some new distribution hub somewhere in the Irish Midlands? How long is that going to take? What kind of capital is that going to require? So, my suspicion is that this issue may not be closed off just yet. I have a feeling that the Commission may look at this in the long term, because if you think about it, you have EU companies in the Netherlands, for example, trying to trade into Ireland, being put at a disadvantage over UK companies that are trading into Ireland tariff-free. That can't be right in whatever way you look at it. So, what I'm hearing is that DG Taxud is kind of scouring the acquis communautaire, the rule book, to see what way there might be a workaround. But certainly in any of the official or even unofficial briefings I'm getting, it's like, this is the new reality. Distribution hubs have to change. The supply chains have to adapt.
Yeah, and I suppose we've seen that in the last number of weeks, particularly with Stena Line. They've changed some of their ferry routings to go around GB, and they're now operating more ferries direct Rosslare to Cherbourg. And is the reality that a lot of businesses are going to just avoid GB completely? And what does that mean really for GB? With all the extra paperwork, the time, the checks, it's just not worth it. And I know we've been talking to an awful lot of our members, and about a third have said that they're not going to use GB anymore as a distribution route. So is that the reality going forward if a workaround? Because it'd be very difficult to see how a free trade agreement could be changed at this point. So I don't know if either of you have, maybe Carol, do you have any thoughts on that first?
I suppose from a customs side, what I would be saying is if you can avoid the UK if at all possible, then really you do. So the new routes opening up have been a huge benefit in that regard. Because if you've got to ship goods through the UK to get to Europe, you're going through about 4 different systems. And, even I was kind of like, what is this all about? So, it's just so complicated. If you can avoid it and stay within Europe, that's really what you want to do. And you're seeing the traffic increase on the Rosslare Cherbourg, I think, route as a result, and vice versa, trying to avoid. The one thing about continent is that they would be more used to the transit regime. So they have guarantees in place. But what we are seeing is that what happens is when you move goods through the UK, they're covered by a guarantee, and then you have to discharge the transit, because otherwise your guarantee just keeps getting used up and used up and used up. So if those transits aren't discharged, the supplier can't actually ship anymore because they've got all their guarantee used up. So now you've got a process in place that you have to get that sorted out, which is also proving time consuming. So personally, for me, I'd be like, if you can avoid the UK, and you're shipping into Europe or shipping from Europe, definitely do.
Yeah, I suppose that feeds in. I mean, Ireland, as you say, it's an island beyond an island. We're we're really reliant on on GB, I suppose, in particular, from a distribution hub. So in some instances, it's probably unavoidable, and that means businesses are really going to just have to get to grips with the paperwork.
Yeah, no, I think so. And I mean, obviously the land bridge, historically was a very straightforward, easy route into the single market for Irish exporters. It was the quickest way, and people were used to it, and it was the best way to get your goods up into I suppose the northwestern seaboard of Europe, where you can get into big urban centers quickly. If you're going down to Cherbourg, you're still a bit out of the way of your main markets. I think there's going to be a huge focus on expanding the routes from Irish ports to mainland Europe. We've seen Amsterdam opening up. I'm not a shipping expert. I just don't know how fast that can be done. Can it be done quickly enough to make sure Irish exporters can hold on to their clients? Because obviously, perishability is a question when it comes to shipping by sea. And we've seen that very graphically when it comes to Scottish shellfish exporters. Can you still get to your produce to market fresh quickly enough if you're going by sea? Because it is a much longer journey. And if you have to start freezing stuff, have you got the facilities for that? Does that mean the price of or the value of your goods falls? These are all important questions.
Yeah, and I mean, I know we've aside from supply chain rearrangements, we've seen an awful lot of businesses obviously struggle with the paperwork themselves, and we've touched on it already. But Carol, just one for you. If you were a business struggling, and I mean, we're aware that there's a lack of customs expertise as well out there, that there may not be someone there to pick up the phone and help with these declarations. What would your advice be to a business that is struggling to get their heads around all the paperwork?
You really have to learn. You have to learn the new rules. You're operating now in an international environment, and you just have to be able to get your head around it. So there's a lot of supports out there, and I would really encourage everybody to take advantage of all of them. If you look at the local enterprise offices, they're consistently running virtual online daily customs procedures courses and they're all free to can work through and explain how you import, how you export processes, what the step-by-step processes are. If you're in the food or you're in fish, you've got Board BIA and BIM doing mentoring. Enterprise Ireland are supporting mentoring programs for companies as well to explain to them what their procedures need to be. You've got intertrade support. So there's like a huge amount that's being made available, and it really would encourage everybody to take advantage of that. You've got a 9,000 grant from Enterprise Ireland to take on somebody and train them up in your customs, and then to work with clearance agents in relation to getting the documents completed. I'd say be very careful of trying to be a clearance agent yourself. It's a very complicated business, and it's very specific, very niche expertise, and you really need to know the codes basically that go into every box and the error reports, and it's a very specific. You really need 2 or 3 years experience on that. But apart from that, I would absolutely encourage everybody to really take advantage of all the training that's out there. Go on as many courses as possible. They're all free, and then get a procedure in place. Because as I said, we ship every day. We're a global economy. Companies are and have been very successful at trading internationally. So this is all very doable. It's just, unfortunately, now it's a little bit slower than it was, and you just have to follow the process. So, as I said before, there's no point fighting against it. You just have to accept it, move on away and learn it. And those supports are available. First place I go to is your local enterprise office.
Okay, I think that's some good tips for our participants. Now, I know we have a number of questions coming in about customs, and we will come back to them, but I suppose I just want to move beyond customs and maybe look at the free trade agreement from a services perspective. I know trade and goods, I suppose, has dominated the media over the last few weeks. But I mean, Tony, just looking at the free trade agreement, you know, I mean, I'm thinking of the UK as reliance on the EU essentially for services, and vice versa. The EU, I suppose, ship more goods to the UK than and vice versa. So, from a deal perspective, it's mostly about trade and goods. There's very little about trade and services, and I know there's some decisions around equivalence of financial services coming down the line in a few months. But from if we step back, like, who was the deal better for? Was it the EU or the UK?
Well, when you ask people in Brussels that, they say the UK kind of got the deal that they were looking for, but what they were looking for was, you know, ultimately a very basic free trade agreement, because they were, you know, pretty much prioritizing and emphasizing sovereignty over everything else. So they were moving away from any kind of alignment at all with EU regulations or the EU way of doing things, and moving away from any role for the European Court of Justice. So I think when it comes to goods, yeah, I mean, it's a pretty good free trade agreement for goods, zero tariffs, zero quotas. But beyond that, then you start to see the problems. And as we've discussed, the non-tariff barriers are very acute. VAT, you helped me one morning try and get my head around VAT, and it's, you know, extremely complicated, business to business, business to consumer. Fisheries, the UK didn't do as well as they wanted. Yes, they'll be able to catch more fish in 5.5 years' time, but the EU still has very strong access, and they've got still very strong leverage on getting that access. Services, yeah, everyone says the UK did not prioritize services. They didn't prioritize financial services, strangely, because of the value that it provides the UK economy. And we have yet to get an equivalence decision from the European Commission on financial services. I mean, certainly for the EU, when it comes to capital markets, derivatives, clearing houses, they do have an interest in keeping access to the City of London. Elsewhere, you know, a lot of the stuff that the UK does well, you know, architecture, other business services to the EU, which they've done very well in, they're really suffering there because, you know, there are a huge number of barriers now to offering your services as a UK company in the EU. I mean, at a very basic level, you can have visa-free travel mobility into the EU for 90 days out of 180 days, but that is only for meetings, for preparing contracts, and it's not for paid work. So, I mean, I was contacted by the just to give you a good example of one field which has sort of been hit in so many levels. I mean, professional cycling. My brother-in-law is a very keen cyclist in Derry, and he put me in touch with this procycling.com, and they had all these questions about the different parts that go into a bicycle, a racing bike, you know, coming from different parts of the world. And you've got the accumulation problem there that Carol will be familiar with. They're hit very badly. Professional cyclists have to spend, you know, between February and October training and racing in the EU. What does that mean for them? Are they being paid? If they're being paid, then do they need a visa? Probably. And then we had the whole question about musicians, artists, journalists not being able to travel the way they could to do gigs, to do tours, because the UK refused to accept the EU's basic provision for those kind of services. So again, you know, the UK was prioritizing sovereignty and wanting to do things their way, and a lot of people are just having to come to terms with that.
Absolutely, yeah. There's an awful lot of change that is probably a lot of people haven't even really realized. And yeah, we've seen all the talk about the visas and the musicians, like such a massive industry for the UK and the problems they're having. So, I mean, I suppose just thinking about Ireland's relationship with the UK going forward, and maybe we both want to take this. Carol, maybe I'll go to you first. Like, you know, the UK would have been a huge ally of Ireland's around the table at various different EU forums. What do you see going forward, you know, particularly around tax matters? Like, what do you see as the future being for Ireland within Europe?
I think there's more of a Tony question. I'm just customs. I only work with the trucks. I'll leave that one to you, Tony.
Yeah,
We'll
no, fair enough. Yeah, no, that's a very big question, and I think politically the Irish government has signalled that it has to completely reimagine, reinvent its relationship with the UK outside of the EU. And yes, of course, Ireland had a very close. Ireland was very kind of adjacent to the UK in the EU on a lot of issues, taxation being the prominent one, the single market, digital market, you know, the services directive. Ireland was of a like mind when it came to, you know, it being an open trading global economy, and it sort of positioned itself a lot closer to the UK and say the Netherlands than maybe some of the more protectionist, you know, instinctive countries like France, Italy. Now that all has to change, and of course Ireland and the UK are co-parents of the Good Friday Agreement and Northern Ireland. So that's a relationship that still has to be worked on and cultivated. And of course, it has suffered tremendous damage by Brexit. You know, the just on that point, you know, we've heard a lot of the problems that Northern Ireland traders are having with the protocol, with goods coming in from GB, even goods going in the other direction. Yes, there have been mitigations and facilitations put in place. There's a grace period that the South doesn't actually have. It's worth noting that the grace period for waiving export health certificates for 3 months and then the whole chilled meats issue for 6 months, the South doesn't have those benefits. So again, all of this feeds into the broader question as to the popular acceptance of the protocol, and certainly Ireland will want to make sure the protocol is, if not embraced, then at least people will become reconciled to it and will learn to live with it. And then there's the other question of, you know, once we get through this very negative phase at the moment, you know, the reality is that Northern Ireland is still operating within the single market, and all of the problems that UK GB companies have in trading into Europe, on paper, Northern Ireland companies won't have those problems. They can trade directly into the South and directly into the rest of the single market. So, you know, that is an avenue that has to be explored in the long term. And I think when you're asking about the Irish government's posture and all of this, I think they will want to be facilitators there as much as possible, within their own, you know, political sort of, they'll want to stay within their political lane when it comes to Northern Ireland. But you know, the Irish government will certainly want to encourage that best of both worlds potential there, even if we have tremendous difficulties at the moment.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. And I suppose we might just turn, because I'm conscious that we have about 20 minutes left, and we might just turn to some questions. And I guess I'm not unexpectedly seeing an awful lot of customs questions for Carl, but there's just a couple here for Tony, which I might just cover off on first. So there was one there, and sorry, it's just gone off my screen. So equivalence in standards was important in getting a deal over the line. I know you mentioned it earlier. Divergence will come between the UK and EU. And when do you expect we'll start to see that divergence, and which industries are likely to be impacted from that?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I mean, the UK has certainly signaled that it is looking into the whole question of workers' rights and the working time directive, and you know, that's raised quite a few alarm bells in, you know, among unions and also in the EU, and this goes to the heart of the very, very difficult issue of the level playing field, which took up so much energy and time in the negotiations. So I mean, from what I've read, I don't see any huge appetite among firms to get rid of some of those EU influenced standards and protections. But if the UK does start to unpick some of those, then you could see a retaliation from the EU. This is all going to be worked out through the Joint Partnership Council, and there's a whole architecture there for arbitration and retaliation and so on. But the EU will be watching very carefully to make sure that any of those divergences are not going to undercut the single market. And that's why, as I mentioned earlier, member states are going to want to be in the driving seat when those decisions are made. I suppose another big question is what we call SPS, animal health, food safety rules. The UK may feel the need to diverge from the EU if they're going to strike a free trade agreement with the US, because certainly Congress is very keen that US food producers are able to sell their products in the in the UK market and the EU market as well, of course. But there's the kind of classic questions of GMOs and chlorinated chicken and other issues like that. So I think we'll just have to wait and see how far and how ambitious the UK is in diverging. And what's the benefit? Is there a clear benefit? Because the more they diverge, the more they're going to be hit by tariffs from the EU if that retaliation kicks in. And then, of course, there's I think it's important to remember that we see all of these issues through the lens of the Conservative government and the sort of Eurosceptic wing there, which has been in power since how long? So nearly 10 years now. A Labour government in due course may have a much more different view of its relationship with Europe and its approach to diverging from EU standards. So I think this is going to be a fluid relationship over the long term, and not everything is going to be set in stone forever.
No, absolutely. I think it's a time will tell kind of an approach. So I think turning just to Carol, we're just going to cover a few of the customs questions. But I suppose if we could step back just for a moment, a number of questions are coming in on, importing into GB and onto ROI from EU or beyond. So I wonder, Carol, would it be worth just maybe taking participants, from a step-by-step process if you have a situation where you are importing from, so you're moving goods from, say, France to the UK to ROI, what from a high level, what kind of customs exposure do you have in that situation, assuming the goods are just moving through UK? Because there seems to be an awful lot of distribution questions coming in.
Okay. So you've got two or three options here. If you're moving, your first one, as we discussed earlier, was the transit regime, where if you move goods from France through the UK onto Ireland and they don't undergo any processing or change in the UK, you put them under transit. So you raise your transit in, say, France. You show your transit documents. It's got a TAD document to HMRC as you pass through the UK. You arrive in Ireland, your transit gets discharged, and that's the end of it. So that is the simplest, but it does mean that the goods have to kind of continually move, and you can't have a situation where they would be offloaded and then unpacked and repacked. Your other option is if your supplier is big enough, and we just find that not all the suppliers are big enough, they don't just want to put they just don't feel the costs are worth it, that you'd put a customs warehouse in place in the UK. So again, if you take your shipments, you're going from France into the UK, put them into a bonded warehouse in the UK, so that suspends all duty and VAT. You do your packaging, unpackaging, etc., and then you move them from the UK into Ireland by way of an export declaration from the UK and an import declaration into Ireland. If you can get a certificate of called non-manipulation to show that the goods have remained under customs supervision while in the UK, then you may be able to retain the EU origin coming back into Ireland, so that would avoid the duties. So that is a perfect solution, but the UK distributor needs to be big enough to manage that, and we're just getting a lot of kickback from UK distributors who don't want to kind of have the cost of running those distribution centres. Now that may change over time. They may just realise that they have no choice if they're going to be acting as a distributor back into Europe, that bond warehouse is just the way to go. So that would be an ideal situation. Thirdly, you've got the solution I was talking about in the past, over the last weekend, on the return goods relief. So in this case, again, your goods leave France. You have your original export declaration leaving France. You have you have an additional document here now, an INF3 document, also stamped by French customs, goes into the UK. And then when it comes over to Ireland, you show Irish customs, like in a nutshell, that these goods originally left France, and you have your export declaration and your INF document to prove it. So you're kind of working from, none of them are ideal. I mean, this is on the basis that the trade agreement doesn't get kind of clarified in relation to European product, but you're really working with one of those three options, because otherwise you are going to end up with the customs duty hit coming into Ireland.
Absolutely. So there's a lot of different options and a lot of rules to get for businesses to get their heads around. And just on online sales, Carl, could you just maybe touch on that a little bit? I mean, I know we've heard a lot about Amazon in the media in recent weeks. Does the distribution issue with GB affect that as well? If you were ordering online?
Yeah, so anything coming into Ireland from outside the EU, so from GB, is subject to these customs, is subject to tariffs and import VAT. Now you do have a low value relief for goods under 150 euros. If they're under 150 euros, you're not going to pay customs duties, but they have to be under 22 euros to not pay VAT. Yeah. But on the other hand, you won't get charged VAT, so that kind of should equal itself out. But you still have the same requirements in relation to everything moving across the border requires a document, requires a declaration. So everything leaving the UK as now an individual kind of state for customs purposes requires an export declaration. Everything entering Ireland requires an import declaration. And then it's a matter of working the tariffs thereafter. Do they qualify as originating? Are they under the 150 euros? What's the VAT implication? You'll see a lot of the online sales, a lot of the websites, well, for clothing and stuff, if it's a consumer, they might take the duty and VAT themselves and deliver to you on a duty paid basis. So they're set up in Ireland to do that. The worst situation is, you see it in the news over the last couple of days, where consumers were getting hit with duty hits or VAT hits in order to collect their goods, which is what you don't want. It's what you want to avoid. So you need to always check on the website about that. But online sales are definitely, it really, in a way, doesn't matter if, once they're over that 150 euro threshold, you're going to have your customs costs.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of people got a lot of surprises in January when they got their online shopping that might have been held up in Unpulse before charges were paid. So it just to reiterate that, because we did have a question in about delivered duty paid. So that's when the likes of Amazon or whoever the online seller is will actually pay the VAT and on your behalf.
So if you buy from, and I had this question from a client this morning, if you buy from someone and your contract says delivered duty paid, then it's their obligation to deliver those goods to you with all duty and VAT paid. So you don't have any costs of clearance, any import VAT costs or any customs costs. The difficulty with it is that in order to deliver on a duty paid basis, you need to be established in Ireland. So if you're a UK company and you're not established in Europe, you can't act as an importer, so you're going to have to get your agent to act as an importer, and then the agent is jointly and severally liable, and it's really hard to get an agent to act on that basis. So while you can, operationally, in practice, you really need to be established in Ireland/the EU, and if you're selling in Ireland, you need to be VAT registered. So you've got a process to go through, and we had to do a lot of work with suppliers in the UK last year in order to kind of get that VAT registration in place. So you're first looking at VAT registration, and then next you're looking at actual establishment and what's the substance there. So you have a lot of processes to go through.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know we spoke to a number of businesses that did go through all that process and felt they were really prepared and still found themselves caught out with certain things. So there's an awful lot of stuff to go through. So, and I suppose just, moving away slightly from the practical application of customs, Tony, into the future, how do you think, how successful do you think the UK might be in concluding trade deals outside the EU now that they've full autonomy over their customs and trade policy? I know you referenced future trade deals with the US earlier, but how do you think, how successful will they be, do you think?
Well, yeah, it remains to be seen, which I know is a terrible answer. But I mean, so far they've just been rolling over the agreements that the EU has with third countries, so that the UK can pretty much still avail of the provisions of those free trade agreements. They've done one with Japan, and again, the benefits there. I mean, there was a very interesting exchange in the House of Commons between Liz Truss and Emily, can't remember her second name, she's the Shadow Trade Secretary, Emily Thornberry. And I think she did quite a bit of digging and discovered that, in fact, when you look at how the UK was benefiting from the EU-Japan Free Trade Agreement, and the difference between that and the UK-Japan Free Trade Agreement, it was actually a net loss overall for the UK. So, it's going to take a while for the UK to build up its free trading, negotiating powers and prowess, and then it depends. I mean, I'm not a trade expert, but all of the evidence seems to suggest that gravity is the main thing when it comes to trade. You trade more with your closest geographical neighbors. And that's why, for many people, Brexit just is so counterintuitive from a trading point of view. Yes, there are markets around the world, and what you often heard from Eurosceptics was that 90% of growth is happening outside the EU. Well, I mean, the definition of a developing company is that it's growing. So yes, those countries are growing, and there are certainly opportunities there. But the EU is also, like Germany, doesn't seem to have any problem exporting around the world. So again, what massive gains will be there, it's hard to say, but it's early days.
Absolutely. A number of questions are coming in, or a number of observations really around Northern Ireland and the NI protocol. And we've touched briefly on it, but I suppose the kind of overarching theme of the questions is that, is there a possibility, do you think, Tony, for Northern Ireland to thrive under this existing deal? I mean, you did touch on it earlier that NI has a foot into the UK and EU now. Is it possible that it's going to be a positive thing, or how do you see the relationship, I suppose, developing over the years ahead?
Yeah, I mean, I think every effort will be made in Northern Ireland and by the Irish government as well, and certainly by the EU. I mean, it's in everybody's interest for this new hybrid model to work. If you think it through, I mean, if you've got a company in GB that is struggling to export into the EU because of paperwork, and just say if it's in the food sector, if you shift production to Northern Ireland, you won't have the paperwork problem. You can export your goods across the border into the south, and from there into the EU single market. But you still have the geographical distance problem. You're still going to be then competing with Irish companies in the south who are taking up slots on ferries trying to get stuff over. So I think all of this will take a long time to bed down. But there are certainly sectors which can benefit in manufacturing, in the services thing. I was reading the Financial Times last week, and they were talking about some UK companies that were advised. Sorry, I think it was The Guardian, that they were advised by the Department of Trade to set up branches in the EU, and that meant that they were taking on employees in the Netherlands and laying off employees in GB, just to make trade into the EU easier. So you could argue that could be easily done in Northern Ireland, because Northern Ireland's people are they speak the language, they're operating under the same legal framework up until that point. There's a bit. This is an area that I'm not as familiar with, but the question of whether services from Northern Ireland can benefit from the single market membership, or whether it's only goods. I think services, they're still pretty much under the UK umbrella. But again, I think all of this will take time. It's like shifting and re-engineering supply chains. It takes 5 to 7 years. And again, in 4 years' time, we're going to have the Northern Ireland Assembly taking its first view on the protocol. So that will be a really key moment. So, politically, you could see why the Irish government and the UK and the EU would want to do their best to create the conditions for a benign perspective on the protocol in time for 2025, whenever this takes effect.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And Carl, just one for you. Do you think, and I know we've touched on already that UK have introduced some easements on customs control and SPS checks, etc. Ireland, I guess, is in a different position because we are effectively following EU rules. Is there any scope at all, one of the questions in is here, is to actually ease any of the customs controls? Now, we've seen minor adjustments by Revenue on their systems in recent weeks to allow declarations through, but is there any, I suppose, wiggle room at all?
In my view, no, because the European Union Customs Code is the European legislation. It's applied, it's directly implementable in each member state. It has to be implemented in the same way in each country, because then if there was an easement here, then you could say, well, Austria might say, well, I'd like to have, an easement for imports from Norway, or Sweden might say the same, or, it's one cost. When you're talking about customs in Europe, it's one territory, one country, with one set of rules, and you don't diverge when you're talking about goods, and when you're talking about imports and exports, there is no divergence from the legislation. The rules are the rules.
Okay, yeah, that's fairly definitive, I think. So look, I think we just have time for one more question. I'm conscious of the time. I want to get everyone out by 5. So I suppose, Tony, I'll put the last question to you. One of them question just came in here on, I know there's been some rumours and some writings about the EU possibly seeking an extension date to ratify the deal. Do you think that is going to be the case? I mean, initially they'd said the end of February, which I guess is a very speedy mechanism. These things normally take months or even years. So what's your take on that?
Yeah, no, definitely they're going to seek an extension to the provisional application agreement that they made. And it's noticeable that the EU very quickly announced who their co-chair on the Joint Partnership Council would be. That's Maros Šefčovič, who's also running the Joint Committee for the withdrawal agreement. I think the EU did that deliberately to try and prompt the UK to announce who their person would be, because if you're going to get an extension to the provisional application, you can only do it through this forum of the Joint Partnership Council, and until that's up and running, they can't ask the UK for it, but they certainly are going to ask the UK for it, because they just won't have everything done in time for the end of February. And so what has to happen is the Commission has to ask for it, and that request has to also be approved by the Council, by member states, and by the European Parliament. So again, this is what they call in the jargon internal cuisine on the EU side, to do that before they can formally ask the UK for this extension, but they will ask them for sure.
Okay, thank you. Well, look, thank you, Tony, and thank you, Carl, for some wonderful insights. I hope everyone enjoyed the webinar, and I do appreciate Carl and Tony giving up their time when what is a very busy period. And just to say, I suppose, if you are still, I know there were a number of questions that we didn't get to, particularly on the VAT side, but we are running future webinars on these topics. If you are keen to learn more about customs, the Institute does run an 8-week customs course, and there's a new intake starting in the middle of February, so there's more information on our website on that. But look, just to say thank you, Carl, thank you, Tony, really insightful morning, and we really appreciate it, and thanks for taking the time. Enjoy your afternoon, everybody, and thanks for joining. Okay,
thanks a lot.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.